Imagine like 136,000 people rushing into the emergency room, actively having massive heart attacks.
Right, a huge number of people.
Yeah, and now imagine the doctors looking at their charts and realizing that, 75% of those patients had perfectly normal cholesterol level.
It's just a wild clinical statistic.
It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
we're constantly told that navigating health and longevity means following this very rigid, predictable set of rules. But when the standard rules lead to statistics like that, you sort of have to start questioning the entire playbook.
Oh, you completely have to upend the traditional narrative. I mean, we're conditioned to think that aging gracefully requires this like exhausting battle of restriction, right?
Yeah.
And relying on these baseline medical averages that, well, they often miss the actual danger altogether.
Yeah.
But when we look at the clinical data and the molecular biology gathered for today's deep dive, a vastly different roadmap emerges.
And honestly, sitting here looking at your setup, this incredible mix of a sleek medical lab and a cozy book-filled study, it is the exact right atmosphere to just tear up that old playbook.
Yeah, I like to keep it comfortable but functional.
It works because we are getting into some heavy science today, but, keeping it completely accessible. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Our mission today, custom tailored for you listening right now, is to bypass the generic advice and uncover the hidden, truly counterintuitive biological levers that build real resilience. You're sitting right here in the room with us as the third person in this conversation.
Exactly. Pull up a chair.
We are digging into the source material from the Essential Guide to Metabolic and Cellular Longevity, and I promise you, this is going to completely change how you view your own biology.
The stakes are incredibly high, but what we're exploring today is actually surprisingly practical. I mean, we're looking at optimizing everything from the structural integrity of your cell membranes to the specific ways your nervous system processes emotional trauma.
It's crazy how connected it all is.
It is. It's really about understanding the language your body actually speaks.
Right, and that language starts at the absolute foundation, which is the protective walls of your cells. I mean, we have spent the last 50 years waging this dietary war against saturated fats, treating them as the ultimate villain.
The absolute worst thing you could eat, yeah.
Exactly. But there's a massive nuance we missed specifically regarding this odd chain saturated fat called C15 or pentadecanoic acid.
Right, and it's a profound paradigm shift. The current clinical guidance points to incorporating roughly 100 to 200 milligrams of this specific fat daily.
Wait, where do we even get that?
Well, you can get it through full-fat, grass-fed dairy like butter and cheese or, just as an isolated supplement.
Okay, grass-fed butter as a longevity compound. That's going to blow some minds. But let's dig into the chemistry a bit. Why does this specific fat act so differently than the saturated fats we've been warned about for decades?
It entirely comes down to its molecular structure. So the fats typically associated with systemic inflammation are even-chain fats like C16. But C15 is an odd-chain fatty acid. And crucially, it has no double bonds in its carbon chain.
And why do the double bonds matter so much?
Because in biochemistry, double bonds are basically vulnerable spots. They're places where oxygen can swoop in, steal an electron, and cause the fat to degrade or oxidize. But because C15 lacks those vulnerabilities, it's practically immune to lipid peroxidation.
So it basically doesn't go rancid inside the cell.
Precisely. It doesn't go rancid. So instead of oxidizing and causing damage, it acts as this impenetrable physical armor for the cell membrane.
Wow.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just structural support. C15 actively repairs mitochondrial function.
Like the powerhouse of the cell stuff.
Exactly. It activates a protein called AMPK, which essentially acts as your cellular fuel gauge. When fuel is running low, AMPK triggers massive cellular cleanup and repair.
Right, like taking out the biological trash.
Exactly. And simultaneously, C15 inhibits mTOR.
Which is what exactly?
mTOR is the biological pathway that drives rapid, unchecked cell growth and accelerated aging. So C15 turns up the repair pathway and turns down the aging pathway.
Okay, so C15 is basically biological rust-proofing for our cells, whereas eating those highly unstable fats is like driving a car on salted roads without a clear coat.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Right, because you might not see the damage today, but eventually the whole chassis just corrodes.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the mechanism. You're providing a stable, unreactive shield that also manages your internal energy switches.
But, okay, I have to push back here on behalf of everyone listening. If this one specific compound found in dairy fat is actually a geroprotector-like. A literal anti-aging molecule. Did the medical community just, throw the baby out with the bathwater when they told us to switch to margarine in the 90s?
Well, what's fascinating here is the sheer statistical weight proving exactly that. I mean, a meta-analysis in the clinical data showed that just a tiny 0.1% increase of C15 in your bloodstream,
Wait, 0.1%? That's tiny.
just a fraction of a percent, that tiny increase correlates with a staggering 32% reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
A 32% drop from a fraction of a percent increase. That is insane.
It is, and it beautifully explains the anomaly of longevity hotspots. You look at populations in the blue zones, like Sardinia, right?
Where people live forever.
Exactly. They regularly live well past 100 in excellent health, and their C15 levels naturally sit 2 to 3 times higher than the global average.
And the craziest part is the initial discovery of this mechanism didn't even happen in humans, right? Didn't Dr. Stephanie Van Watson, stumble onto this while studying Navy bottlenose dolphins?
She did, yeah. She's a veterinary epidemiologist. She was observing that older dolphins were developing a condition perfectly mirroring human metabolic syndrome.
Like fatty liver disease and all that.
Exactly. Fatty liver disease, severe insulin resistance. But the dolphins that maintained diets naturally high in C15, they entirely avoided those metabolic breakdowns.
Which just proves how deeply conserved mammalian biology really is across species. But, looking at how fats operate inside our cells naturally brings us to how fats travel through our bloodstream.
Right, the delivery system.
Which leads right back to that massive heart attack statistic I mentioned at the very start of the show. We know the standard total LDL cholesterol test is practically a coin flip for predicting cardiovascular disease.
It's terribly inaccurate on its own, yeah.
But the shift toward measuring ApoB particle count completely reframes how we look at hidden risks.
It does, because a standard LDL panel only measures the total weight of the cholesterol floating in your blood.
Just the weight.
Right. It gives you an aggregate number, but it tells you absolutely nothing about the actual structure or the size or the count of the particles carrying that cholesterol.
And for anyone wondering, why is particle count so much deadlier than the total weight?
Okay, imagine your bloodstream as a highway. If I tell you there are 10 tons of vehicles on the road, you don't know if that's 5 massive, slow-moving semi-trucks or 1,000 tiny, erratic sports cars aggressively weaving through lanes.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. So, insulin resistance, which is driven by heavy starch and sugar consumption, forces your liver to manufacture those erratic sports cars. It creates millions of small, dense cholesterol particles.
Because the sheer number of those small particles drastically increases the mathematical probability that they're going to crash into the arterial wall, oxidize, and form plaque.
Right, exactly. The more cars on the road, the more crashes you get. This is why testing for apolipoprotein B, or ApoB, is non-negotiable. An ApoB test doesn't weigh the cargo. It counts every single one of those dangerous plaque-causing sports cars.
Wow. Okay, so what else should we be looking for besides just ApoB?
Well, in addition to ApoB, a functional panel requires checking fasting insulin to catch early metabolic dysfunction, and high-sensitivity CRP, or HSCRP.
To measure the inflammation.
Exactly. You have to measure the inflammation that makes the arterial walls vulnerable to those crashes in the first place.
Right. Makes sense. And there's also lipoprotein A, right?
Yes, LPA. Lipoprotein A is a genetic variant of cholesterol that acts almost like biological Velcro.
Biological Velcro. Yikes.
Yeah, so if you have a high ApoB particle count and high lipoprotein A, those small particles become incredibly sticky and adhere to the arteries much faster. You also want to look really closely at your triglycerides and HDL, aiming for a ratio as close to 1-to-1 as possible.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I go to my doctor and my standard LDL total is a supposedly perfect 90, but I never test ApoB, I could basically be walking around with a completely false sense of security while my arteries are quietly accumulating plaque.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that false security is exactly what causes 75% of those 136,000 emergency room patients to have heart attacks, despite having quote-unquote good total cholesterol.
That is just terrifying.
It is. Virtually none of them had healthy triglycerides or HDL. Their particle sizes were a disaster due to undetected insulin resistance. Dr. Mark Hyman frequently details this. It's the skinny fat illusion.
Oh, right, where people look totally fine on the outside.
Yes. He treats patients who look physically fit and possess flawless standard lipid panels, but internally, they harbor fatal insulin resistance and heavily calcified arteries.
Because their diet is heavily refined carbohydrates driving hidden insulin resistance, but they assume they're fine because the old flawed weight measurement says they're healthy.
Exactly. And this invisible metabolic dysfunction affects over 93% of Americans.
93%.
Yeah, it's systemic. But when we test ApoB instead, we stop handing out unnecessary statins based on a flawed total weight, and we finally target the actual root cause, which is severe sugar reduction to restore insulin sensitivity.
And reversing that hidden insulin resistance requires looking really closely at how we manage our glucose in the first 16 hours of the day. And the most critical lever for that happens the moment we wake up, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. We have to front load the biological system. You need to consume 30 to 50 grams of high-quality protein early in the morning.
Okay, but we all know someone, I mean, maybe it is even you listening right now, who just skips breakfast, grabs a massive iced coffee, and tries to white-knuckle their way to a late lunch.
Which is probably the most metabolically destructive routine you can adopt.
Really?
The worst. Oh, easily. Your body is highly sensitive to insulin in the morning. When you skip that meal and run on caffeine, your body still needs glucose to fuel your brain.
Right.
So it triggers a release of cortisol and adrenaline, your core stress hormones, to chemically force your liver to dump stored sugar into your blood.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Running on coffee instead of protein is like heating your house by burning your own furniture.
Yeah.
You can get a quick burst of energy, but you're literally destroying your internal structural foundation to do it. And eventually, the entire system is going to collapse.
That is exactly the physiological trade-off. You invariably crash in the late afternoon. But introducing a dense, high-protein breakfast provides a massive influx of essential amino acids that stabilize the entire system.
What kind of amino acids are we talking about?
Well, you flood the body with leucine, for one, which acts as the master biological switch to turn on muscle protein synthesis.
Nice.
And you also deliver tryptophan, which crosses the blood-brain barrier and provides the exact raw materials your brain needs to manufacture serotonin and dopamine, securing your mood and focus for hours.
And it actually visibly changes the neurobiology of how we perceive food later in the day, right?
Yeah.
Because functional MRI scans literally show that a high-protein morning blunts afternoon food cravings.
Right. It dampens the activation of the brain's reward centers when you're exposed to junk food later on.
So you basically biologically remove the desire to binge.
Exactly. Dr. Heather Lady, who is a renowned protein metabolism researcher, ran this fascinating 6-month trial with 150 teenagers who chronically skipped breakfast.
And teenagers are notoriously the hardest demographic to keep on any kind of nutritional protocol. I mean, good luck telling a teenager what to eat.
Completely. Yet when she introduced a morning meal containing 24 to 30 grams of animal-based protein, compliance skyrocketed to 90%.
90%. That's incredible.
It is. And more importantly, those teenagers performed vastly better on complex cognitive tasks late into the afternoon.
Because their brains weren't constantly fighting a violent blood sugar roller coaster.
Right. Short term, this regulates your morning cortisol and stops that ravenous, guilt-inducing evening snacking.
Which we all hate.
Yeah. And long term, you're actively preventing age-related muscle wasting, known as sarcopenia, and you're aggressively reversing systemic insulin resistance.
Okay, so a heavy protein breakfast builds this fortress around our baseline cortisol and blood sugar. But biology isn't perfectly controlled, right?
Unfortunately not.
So when a sudden, unexpected stressor spikes that cortisol anyway, threatening to flood our system with the exact wear and tear hormones we just worked so hard to avoid, how do we physically force the nervous system back down?
We pull the emergency brake. And human biology has an incredible one built right in. The mammalian dive reflex.
Oh man, the intervention for this sounds slightly unhinged, but it is incredibly effective.
It sounds totally crazy, yeah.
So when you find yourself caught in an overwhelming anxiety spiral, you take a large salad bowl, fill it with ice water, hold your breath, and plunge your bare face into it for exactly 30 seconds.
It sounds like psychological torture, but it's a brilliant evolutionary hack.
How does it even work?
Well, when cold water hits the receptors on your face while you are holding your breath, your central nervous system assumes you're diving deep underwater. It instantly overrides your conscious brain and triggers a massive reflex to keep you alive.
But what exactly is the nervous system doing mechanically during those 30 seconds? I mean, is this just a harsh distraction technique to sort of snap you out of it?
No, it's far more than a distraction. It's a forceful physiological takeover.
Okay, how so?
Your parasympathetic nervous system forcefully plummets your heart rate to conserve oxygen. And simultaneously, it constricts the blood vessels in your arms and legs, redirecting massive amounts of blood flow straight to your brain and heart to protect your core organs.
So we are literally hacking an ancient survival switch to make panic biologically impossible to sustain.
Yes. Your brain cannot maintain the rapid, frantic neural firing of an anxiety spiral when your body is aggressively enforcing a deep conservation state.
That makes total sense.
Clinical psychologist Dr. Jenny Tates incorporates this into the renowned TIPP protocol for emotional regulation.
PAPP, right? What does that stand for?
TIPP stands for temperature, which is the dive reflex, intense exercise to physically burn off the circulating adrenaline, paced breathing to manually activate the calming vagus nerve, and progressive muscle relaxation to literally force the tension out of the muscle fibers.
So it completely overrides psychological panic with a physiological reset.
Exactly.
There's a story she shares about her husband that perfectly illustrates how fast things escalate without this tool. He spilled a glass of milk, got annoyed, aggressively rushed to clean it up, cut his hand on the counter, and became so flooded with escalating cortisol that he stormed out, got in his car, and instantly caused a fender bender.
It is the textbook definition of an unchecked nervous system cascade. One trivial trigger hijacks the brain, and the cortisol compounds on itself until disaster strikes.
And dunking your face in an ice bowl acts like a hard reboot for the nervous system to stop that cascade before you even leave the kitchen.
This raises an important question regarding how our beliefs modulate that biology, too. A massive epidemiological study tracking 28,000 people found that experiencing heavy, acute stress is objectively dangerous.
Right.
But experiencing high stress while holding the deep-seated belief that stress is fundamentally destroying my health is the combination most heavily correlated with premature death.
Wait, so just believing the stress is bad makes it deadlier?
Yes. But by utilizing the dive reflex, you prove to your subconscious that you possess a physical tool to control and extinguish your stress response, which totally neutralizes that fatal belief system.
That shifts us perfectly to the deeper issue, I think. We can use an ice bowl to extinguish the acute fire, but how do we rewrite the subconscious software that keeps launching that panic program in the first place?
We have to clear out the automated triggers through shadow work.
Right, shadow work.
Whenever we experience trauma or severe emotional dismissal, particularly in childhood, the human psyche essentially fractures to protect itself.
Right, we create a repressed identity, the shadow self that carries all the shame, the fear, and the feelings of inadequacy. And to navigate the world, we develop this tough, outward identity, the protector, which usually shows up as intense perfectionism, people-pleasing, or, hyper-control.
Exactly. So when an adult overreacts to a minor criticism at work, it isn't the adult reacting. It is that hidden shadow self feeling deeply threatened and the protector aggressively jumping in to shut the threat down.
So how do we fix that?
The protocol here requires you to identify the specific trigger, sit in a quiet space, and consciously allow that repressed shadow to fully vent its irrational fear. You journal it out aggressively or speak it to an empty room. You give yourself permission to say the ugly, embarrassing things like, I'm a complete failure or everyone is going to abandon me.
And once that wave of raw emotion crests, you consciously step in as the adult and reassure that wounded part of yourself.
Yes, you offer it safety.
Now, I know some people listening might think this sounds incredibly abstract, maybe even a bit woo-woo. How does writing down an irrational, mean thought about yourself actually alter the physical nervous system?
I get the skepticism, but it relies entirely on the mechanics of biological energy cycles. When a deeply stressful event happens and we suppress the emotion to survive it, we create an unclosed loop in our nervous system.
Like a program running in the background.
Exactly. The brain effectively pauses the fight or flight response, keeping it running quietly in the background for decades.
So we were walking around braced for an impact that happened 20 years ago.
Yeah, precisely. That suppressed trauma dictates our automated biological reactions. By actively allowing the repressed identity to feel the terror and express it without judgment, you finally allow the nervous system to complete that stalled energy cycle.
Oh, wow.
And because the brain is highly plastic, When you displace that old fear with a new, empowering reassurance while the body is in an emotionally activated state, you physically wire a brand new, dominant neural pathway.
Katie Clark, a spiritual coach, provided a profound example of this in the sources. She suffered from such crippling imposter syndrome that it physically paralyzed her from posting her videos on YouTube for years. It was just intense subconscious self-sabotage.
And she utilized shadow work to confront it. She sat down, meditated, and allowed her shadow self to write down the absolute darkest, most irrational core fear driving the paralysis. She wrote, "You're just a stupid girl."
Just hearing that hurts. But by letting that specific phrase out, she traced the emotional block back to a distinct childhood trauma where she was made to feel entirely invalidated.
Right.
By validating that historical pain in the present moment, she permanently rewired the psychological barrier. She closed the loop and ended the chronic survival state.
Which restores an immense amount of biological energy. You stop wasting cellular resources constantly fighting your own subconscious.
Okay, so we've aligned the internal nervous system, but true cellular longevity demands we align our internal biological clock with the external environment.
The environment is huge.
And this concept absolutely fascinated me. The ultimate biological battery is pre-sunrise infrared light. We know that blasting our eyes with blue light from screens at midnight destroys our circadian rhythm, but how does morning infrared light act as a battery?
Because light is quite literally a biological nutrient. The protocol here is to step outside before or precisely during sunrise, exposing bare skin and entirely naked eyes to the morning sky. That means no contacts, no glasses, and absolute no viewing it through a window.
What makes that exact time of day so biologically potent, though?
Pre-sunrise light contains massive, concentrated wavelengths of invisible near-infrared light. When those specific wavelengths hit your cellular tissue, they alter the physical structure of the water inside your cells, creating something called exclusion zone water.
Wait, it changes the water inside us?
Yes. This fourth phase of water holds a negative electrical charge, meaning it literally acts as a biological battery, storing voltage that your mitochondria use to generate energy.
It is charging the system on a quantum level. And the impact it has on melatonin is entirely unexpected.
It completely reframes how we view sleep. That same near-infrared light stimulates your body to produce 95% of its total melatonin inside the cells during the day.
During the day, doesn't that make you tired?
No, it doesn't make you sleepy at all. It acts as a master antioxidant to clean up cellular exhaust. Then, as the sun physically breaks the horizon, the spectrum shifts, and natural blue light mixes in. That natural blue light gently signals your brain to spike morning cortisol, waking you up and locking your circadian clock into perfect alignment.
Donnie, a blood sugar specialist whose work we reviewed, highlighted a massive modern trap here. Our highly engineered, energy-efficient modern windows are specifically designed to block thermal heat, which means they violently filter out all of those healing near-infrared wavelengths.
Exactly. If you watch the sunrise through a closed window, you are stripping out the healing frequencies and only absorbing the highly stimulating blue light.
So sitting under indoor office lights all day is essentially like eating pure, refined sugar. It's just naked, isolated blue light. But nature's sunrise is a perfectly balanced biological meal of red, near-infrared, and blue light.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Isolated blue light chronically spikes cortisol and drives up blood sugar. But the balanced spectrum of a sunrise optimizes your mitochondria to burn glucose cleanly and efficiently.
Which is why we need the real thing.
Donnie actually supplements with clinical-grade red and infrared light panels because she works indoors, but she insists that true unfiltered sunrise exposure is the most potent healing mechanism available to us.
So what does this all mean for the actual physical chassis of the body? I mean, our cells are rust-proofed with C15 fats and charged with infrared light. Our metabolism is managing glucose with a heavy protein breakfast, and our nervous system is cleared of acute and chronic panic.
We're doing great internally.
Right. But how do we physically support this high-performance engine so the joints and ligaments don't just break down mid-journey?
We have to talk about the structural scaffolding, your connective tissue. We are obsessed with building muscle, but muscle adapts to stress in a matter of days. Connective tissues, your ligaments and tendons have incredibly poor blood supply.
So they heal slower.
Much slower. It takes them anywhere from 50 to 100 days just to turn over a single batch of collagen.
Okay, so I have always been told that keeping weights light and reps high is the safest way to protect your joints as you age. Are you saying that doing 50 pulsing reps in a boutique bar class or spinning on a bike is actually making my ligaments more fragile?
Well, from a cardiovascular perspective, those classes are wonderful. But from a structural longevity perspective, yes, they can be detrimental.
Really?
High repetition, low weight movements rapidly deplete the structural integrity of connective tissue without ever providing a heavy enough mechanical signal to force them to rebuild stronger. Over time, your ligaments become soft, disorganized, and overly compliant, which leads directly to joint instability.
So if light weights make the scaffolding soft, how do we actually force it to build rigid armor?
We must introduce heavy, slow eccentrics. You have to execute heavy, compound movements like deep squats, deadlifts, or heavy rows, but artificially drag out the lowering phase of the movement.
The lowering part is the eccentric part, right?
Exactly. The lowering portion is the eccentric phase. You need to control that descent for 3 to 5 agonizing seconds, pausing under maximum tension at the bottom.
Why does going agonizingly slow on the way down trigger such a different biological response in a tendon?
Because that extreme, slow tension fires local mechanoreceptors embedded deep inside the tissue. These receptors send an urgent chemical command to your fibroblasts, which are the cells responsible for secreting new collagen.
Okay, so it forces them to work.
Yes. The heavy tension acts as a physical blueprint, forcing the fibroblasts to weave dense, rigid, highly organized collagen fibers that align perfectly with the direction of the force you are applying.
Dr. Stephanie Estima, a functional neurology expert, presented a brilliant clinical case study on this. She had a highly active 47-year-old patient named Sandra who had recently started hormone replacement therapy.
Right, and HRT, specifically estrogen, naturally accelerates the speed of collagen turnover in the body.
Oh, I see.
Because Sandra was doing a lot of movement but completely avoiding heavy mechanical loads, the HRT caused her tissue to rapidly rebuild without any physical blueprint. Her shoulders became painfully loose, and her knees started constantly catching and slipping. The new tissue was entirely disorganized.
So Dr. Estima prescribed a strict protocol of slow, heavy eccentric lifting, and it completely cured Sandra's joint instability in just 10 weeks. The fibroblasts finally had the blueprint they needed to weave rigid armor.
It is the definitive cure for the mysterious migratory joint pain that plagues so many people in midlife. You fortify the structural scaffolding so the body doesn't suddenly fail when you demand performance from it.
When you step back and connect all of these seemingly disparate biological themes, a massive unifying picture really emerges.
It really does.
We are constructing an absolute fortress of longevity. We are reinforcing the cell walls with dolphin-inspired odd-chain fats. We are finding the hidden truth in our bloodstream by abandoning standard weight tests for ApoB particle counts. We are anchoring our glucose and baseline cortisol with massive amounts of morning protein.
It's a complete overhaul.
Yeah. We are forcefully overriding sudden panic with ice water, permanently clearing subconscious blocks through shadow journaling, charging our cellular batteries with raw sunrise light, and forging unbreakable structural scaffolding with heavy, slow eccentrics.
And, if you analyze the core thread running through every single one of those interventions, a very profound philosophy reveals itself.
Which is what?
That modern comforts living our entire lives behind climate-controlled glass, skipping meals for the sake of convenience, blindly relying on standard medical averages, suppressing our most difficult emotions to remain polite, and retreating into light, comfortable exercise, these comforts are the exact things actively destroying our biology.
Wow, that's powerful.
The ultimate longevity hack isn't a miraculous pharmaceutical or a punishing kale-flavored diet. It is the conscious reintroduction of calculated discomfort. Freezing water, agonizingly heavy weights, raw and ugly emotions, unfiltered naked light, and entirely misunderstood fats. We have to violently remind ourselves how to survive so they remember how to thrive.
Calculated discomfort. It's not about punishing your biology. It is about waking it up. Thank you for joining us today for this deep dive. Our challenge to you listening right now is to not let this simply be another interesting conversation you passively absorbed. Take one small piece of this biological roadmap. Maybe it's just stepping outside tomorrow morning to watch the sunrise without your glasses. Maybe it's demanding an ApoB test at your next physical. Or maybe it's just knowing that an ice bowl is sitting in your kitchen if you need to pull the emergency brake and apply it today. Go wake your biology up.